The Department of Employment and Labour has filed papers in court against Huawei Technology South Africa due to alleged non-compliance with employment equity policies. In a statement, the department says Huawei Technology South Africa was audited back in 2020 and found to be in violation of regulations as it employs approximately 90% of foreign nationals. We're joined now by Labour consultant Tony Healy. Tony, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us. So we spoke to one of the lawyers from the Department of Labour on the channel on the weekend, and she made mention of the fact that this is not the only company that they are looking into. A lot has been said about this, but is the country the exception to the rules when it comes to employment equity on foreign nationals in the country?
Good afternoon, Judu. Well, probably not is the answer to that question. When one looks at the employment of foreign nationals, the point of departure is in fact the Immigration Act, which talked to the fact, as one would expect, that there must be a valid work permit for a foreign national to be employed in the country. And very often with these kinds of scenarios, one must draw a distinction between documented and undocumented workers. And certainly it's illegal for any South African employer to employ an undocumented foreign national, so to speak.
In this case, detail is still thin on the part of Huawei Technologies, at least. We have not been able to get comment from them, and neither could we draw anything from the department, as they themselves are still none the wiser. They have told us that Huawei Technologies has not attended a meeting that was intended to set things straight. So you talk about the point of departure, being the Immigration Act. Maybe let's talk about what the law in the country actually says about the employment equity of foreign nationals.
Yes, so after looking at the Immigration Act, in fact, even before the Employment Equity Act, probably more important than that is the Employment Services Act, which was introduced 6 or 7 years ago, which had a particular focus on addressing vulnerable job seekers and vulnerable employees. And part of that Employment Services Act was what we began to see in our law relating to the employment of foreign nationals. Now, I think what's important in this particular issue, and generally, topically, is the fact that there are no quotas per se when it comes to local versus foreign employees. I think that's important. In fact, we don't even have that in the Employment Equity Act when it relates to the demographics within the South African environment. In other words, there are no quotas for the employment of females. There are no quotas for the employment of persons with disabilities, etc. So quotas per se are not a feature of our law presently. That said, I think we're likely to see in the next couple of months the beginning of legislation that does introduce quotas, and probably it's going to be quotas in terms of local versus foreign nationals being employed at the unskilled and the semi-skilled level.
That's rather curious, because according to the state, the quota is 40% of foreign nationals and 60% South Africans.
Well, yes, I don't see that in the legislation. There is no. In fact, if we listen as recently as 2 weeks ago, we have the Minister of Employment and Labour himself saying that quotas are now being considered for the first time at NEDLAC, and we can expect to see legislation unfold in that direction in coming months.
So again, do you perceive that the problem is not the what, but the how it's done, especially given that we don't even have quotas?
Yes, it's difficult to know what's behind this dispute, and one doesn't really want to speculate on such a sensitive issue. I think what is important is that there's absolutely, and rightfully so, a significant focus on the employment of non-South Africans. There is a focus, especially in light of us having the highest unemployment rate in the world. And because so much attention has been placed on this, not just in the last week or two, but in recent months, that has prompted the Minister to start looking at legislation that is going to protect, if you like, a large number or large portion of unskilled and semi-skilled jobs for South Africans before foreign nationals.
Thank you very much for helping us make sense of that. Tony Healy is a labour law expert.